All right, my friends, welcome back to Anti-War Radio. It's Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas. I'm Scott Horton. Thanks for tuning in. And our guest today is the great Jim Lobe. I'm honored to invite him, welcome him back to the show. He is the Washington Bureau Chief for Interpress Service. That's IPS News. You can read most everything he writes at antiwar.com/Lobe and at the antiwar.com blog, where we get benefit of the best of his own blog, Lobe Blog. And Jim has been writing about that particular set of so-called conservatives, the neoconservatives, for about a generation now, and is our country's top expert on the matter by pretty much any measure. Welcome back to the show, Jim. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Glad you could join us today.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
Okay, so basically, I guess I just want to start with a pretty general question. You can go whichever direction you want with it. It's pretty clear that as all the politicians are racing to go and give speeches to the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee this week, that this group, and perhaps the Israel lobby in general, play a pretty significant role in American foreign policy. And I just wonder if you could sort of give us your thumbnail sketch view of exactly how much influence the Israel lobby plays in the United States, and to good or ill.
Well, I should say, first of all, that the conference is now finished. It just finished about half an hour ago. The last speaker was Hillary Clinton, and Senator Obama spoke just before her. Now the delegates, of which there are about 5,000 to 7,000, are heading out to Capitol Hill to lobby their representatives and senators on their agenda. Well, AIPAC itself, in their press materials said that, noted that Forbes or Fortune, I can't remember which, have rated itself, AIPAC, as the most effective foreign policy lobby in Washington. I don't see any reason to disagree with that. I can't imagine which interests would be more powerful than, or which lobby would be more powerful than AIPAC in the foreign policy sphere.
Well, they say overall even that I guess only the AARP, the American Association of Retired People, even rivals their power in D.C. Is that about right?
I think the National Rifle Association does pretty well. Mm-hmm. I think the National Association of Manufacturers is taken quite seriously as well. But they lobby mainly, all of those obviously lobby primarily on domestic issues, not foreign policy.
Right. So the Israel lobby, I guess the best I understand it, AIPAC really doesn't represent, quote-unquote, Israel so much as a very right-wing view, what they call the Likud party over there in Israel. Theirs is the view represented by the American branch of the lobby there.
Well, I think it's more complicated than that. I mean, AIPAC, by its own articles of incorporation, its own charter, are supposed to kind of represent the views of the sitting Israeli government, whether it's Labor, Kadima, or Likud. There's been a lot of tension, particularly between Labor governments and AIPAC over that. That was certainly true under Prime Minister Rabin. And there's been some tension between the Olmert government, the Kadima government, and AIPAC, because the Israeli government under Olmert has taken somewhat more dovish positions, particularly with relation to Palestinians, than AIPAC has. AIPAC does represent a lot of different Jewish organizations, and ideologically those organizations span a tremendous spectrum, from pro-settler groups and Likud, they're not necessarily the same, but they overlap on the right, to quite liberal, dovish groups such as Americans for Peace Now and Israel Peace Forum on the left. The issue is more that the most important people on the executive committee, and who are often also the most important donors, tend to be much more sympathetic to Likud than they do to people who are more to the left of them. And in some cases, they're very sympathetic even to the settler movement. So what you kind of get if you take AIPAC overall in kind of a conference like this is instead of the spectrum of major speakers ranging from far right to, let's say, center-left, which is what the membership of AIPAC consists of, the dominant speakers, aside from elected officials like Obama or McCain or Pelosi, the kind of the experts that they present for discussion of substantive issues range from kind of the far right, the right wing of Likud, to Kadima. Mm-hmm. Let's call it the center-right to centrist in Israeli terms. So AIPAC overall is I would say, is to the right of its membership.
Yeah, it seems like overall, in some opinion polls, and I guess I should have pulled up a few to reference here offhand, but off the top of my head, I think I remember seeing some opinion polls where most American Jews favor land for peace. Most American Jews oppose war with Iran, want withdrawal from Iraq. And these aren't the kinds of views that we see from AIPAC and the Israel lobby in D.C. at all, is it?
Well, AIPAC's been pretty quiet on the Iraq question. On Iran, they're very hawkish, much more hawkish than the Jewish community at large. On Palestinians, they're a bit more hawkish, but you find actually surprisingly, whereas a significant majority of American Jews favor a two-state solution, according to the polls by American Jewish Committee, which are kind of the most consistent every year, they've also become more hawkish and more distrustful of Palestinians, according to those same polls. So there's more skepticism that the Palestinians are willing to have a two-state solution, or that they would be satisfied with that. So there is quite a lot of skepticism in the Jewish community as a whole. But I think what's important here is that on the one hand you have American Jews, of whom there are about 3 million, and who generally hold quite liberal views on most issues, quite progressive views on most issues, even to some extent on Israel, or to a great extent in some cases on Israel. And then you have kind of the organized Jewish community. And already the difference between American Jews writ large and the organized Jewish community will take you a bit to the right. So I guess there are a variety of I don't know how to describe it, but it's like an onion. It depends. The most organized part of American Jewry is represented by something like AIPAC. Mm-hmm. And you will then see that it's considerably to the right of where most American Jews are.
Well, it's funny because that's the same thing. It seems like the same thing as American Christians, where the more organized they are, the more right-wing they tend to be, and the rest are sort of the masses out there, the unorganized opposition to some of their extremist policies.
Yeah, I don't think that used to be so much like in the 60s and the 70s, when you had mainstream churches who were really quite active in civic affairs, quite progressive in their outlook, particularly with respect to foreign policy. 60s, early 70s. But then you had these new groups like Institute for Religion and Democracy, Ethics and Public Policy Center, which were funded by far-right foundations and backed and kind of were intellectually driven by neoconservatives who really, these groups really set out to diminish the influence of the progressive leadership of the mainstream churches. And one would have to say that they were really quite successful in doing that. So you don't hear from the progressive leadership of mainstream churches nearly as much as you did, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And now I want to play this clip for you here, Jim. This is it's shocking, but it's short. This is a clip of the Reverend John Hagee, who is, I don't know if he's the leader, but at least is a big part of Christians United for Israel, the minister from Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, and I believe the keynote speaker at last year's AIPAC conference. And this is from Max
He has
Blumenthal.
fierce features. The Antichrist is going to make Hitler look like a choir boy. When he first comes to power, he's going to slaughter 1/3 of the earth's population. He will become a blasphemer and a homosexual. This phrase that I'm using in Scripture, the God of his fathers, is a phrase in Scripture used solely to identify the Jewish people. It suggests that this man is at least going to be partially Jewish, as was Adolf Hitler, as was Karl Marx. Fourth Reich, led by the Antichrist. It's coming. I believe the Antichrist will come out of Germany. I don't have any Bible proof for that, but I know that history has a strange way of repeating itself.
Senator Joseph Lieberman received by far the best reception.
I want to take the liberty of describing Pastor Hagee in the words that the Torah uses to describe Moses. He is an Ish Elohim, a man of God.